No one forgets the sound of a soul breaking. Isabella Hart was tied to the rough trunk of an old oak tree, left to rot under the judgment of the desert itself. Her wrists were bound so tight the ropes cut into her flesh, her ankles stretched apart and tied wide, forcing her into a position meant to strip away dignity as much as comfort. The dirt clung to her torn dress, stained with sweat, blood, and dust. Every breath came shallow, sharp, as if her own chest refused to keep fighting. This was the law of the village. If a woman was branded a witch, she would not face trial, nor be granted mercy. She would be tied and abandoned, left as prey for wolves, coyotes, and the burning sun. No jury, no judge, just the silence of the wild and the cruel satisfaction of those who watched her fate from afar. Isabella's eyes were hollow, staring into nothing, yet they carried the weight of unspoken screams. She had begged until her throat was raw. She had cried until her tears ran dry. Now her voice trembled into whispers, words barely clinging to life. "Please, untie me." The wind carried her plea through the trees, mocking her weakness with every gust, and the insects buzzed around her wounds, feeding off her helplessness. Her skin, burned by the relentless sun, had begun to peel and blister. She was alive, yet every moment pushed her closer to death. The desert knows no compassion. Her body shook not only from pain, but from the crushing knowledge that no one was coming. Each minute stretched into eternity, her mind twisted in fear. Replaying the curses the villagers spat as they dragged her here, they called her dangerous, they called her cursed, they called her unworthy of life. But what crime had she truly committed? She healed the sick with herbs. She gave remedies to children who coughed through the night. She brought relief where ignorance had failed. For that, the town branded her a witch and delivered her to the beasts. The bark of the oak tore into her back. Every time she struggled, the ropes carved deeper, biting into her skin. Her body sagged forward, but the ropes held her upright in merciless defiance. It was not punishment. It was erasure, a slow, cruel execution disguised as justice. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the forest floor, but to Isabella, the darkness did not promise safety. It promised teeth. It promised glowing eyes watching from the tree line. She could already hear the faint growl of a coyote in the distance. Her lips trembled as she whispered again, the words breaking apart. "Please untie me." It was no longer a demand. It was not even hope. It was the final thread of life clinging to a world that had already turned its back on her. Her voice cracked. Her body shook. She prayed that anyone, even a stranger, might hear her before the beast did. And then the sound of hooves shattered the silence. Dust curled into the evening air as a horse approached. A lone rider pulled to a stop. Jack Malone, a rancher with eyes hardened by years under the sun, sat frozen in his saddle. He had seen cruelty before. He had seen men hang and drunks beaten to death. But this was different. It made his stomach twist, the kind of cruelty that left a scar deeper than any bullet. He swung down from the horse, boots crunching on the dirt. For a moment, he could not move. His throat dried to sand as he stared at the broken figure tied to the tree. Isabella's head hung low, but her lips still moved, repeating those three words that clawed into his chest. "Please free me." Jack's hand hovered near the rope. His mind battled with what his eyes saw. This was not justice. This was a sentence carved by fear and ignorance. The law said she must die, but his gut twisted at the thought of walking away. The sun bled red through the trees, and in that silence, a question burned hotter than the desert itself. If you were Jack Malone, staring at a woman abandoned for the beasts, would you turn away, or would you risk everything to fight for her life? Jack stood there staring at the ropes cutting into Isabella's skin. The marks were so deep it looked like the desert itself had carved its claim on her. He reached out and touched one of the knots. It was tied tight, cruel, like the hands that made it wanted to hurt long after they walked away. The girl lifted her head just a little. Her eyes met his. They weren't the eyes of some witch like the townsfolk said. They were the eyes of someone begging not to be forgotten. Jack felt his gut twist. He had seen plenty of folks punished before, but none of it looked like this. This wasn't justice. This was hate pretending to be law. The village had their own rule. If they called you a witch, you had two choices of death. They could burn you in the square or tie you out here for the beasts to decide. And the truth was, folks thought tying you out in the wild was merciful. They said the sun would finish you fast, but Jack knew better. He knew the desert liked to take its time. As he pulled at the rope, Isabella whispered again, her voice cracked, dry as the sand. They left me for the wolves. Those words hit harder than a bullet. Jack's hands shook on the rope. He could almost see the coyotes circling in his mind, waiting for nightfall. The desert wasn't just cruel, it was patient. One knot came loose, then another. With every pull, more bruises showed, bruises on her arms, her legs, even across her shoulders. It looked like the devil himself had painted them there. Jack clenched his jaw tight. If he walked away, she would die slow. If he stayed, he was breaking the law, and in a place like Tombstone, breaking the law often meant making enemies. He remembered the way the townsfolk whispered when they spoke of curses. How fast a rumor could spread. How quick a crowd could turn mean when fear led the way. He thought of the nights he sat in the saloon listening to men brag about frontier justice. But this wasn't justice. It was ignorance wrapped in rope. The last knot slipped free, and Isabella sagged forward into his arms. Her skin burned hot from the sun, her breath ragged and weak. Jack caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment he held her steady, and he could feel her trembling all over. It wasn't just the heat or the hunger. It was the weight of knowing that her own people wanted her gone. Jack looked down at her torn dress, her bruised arms, the cracked lips trying to form words, and in that silence, she whispered something that froze him where he stood. I was cursed, but what did she mean by that? Jack froze when he heard those words. I was cursed. They slipped out so faint he almost thought he imagined it. But her eyes were open now, looking right at him, wide and glassy. She meant it. Jack swallowed hard. He had heard plenty of stories about curses in dusty saloons and around campfires, old wives' tales that folks repeated when they were scared of what they couldn't explain. Someone lost a baby and blamed the midwife. A cow died and they blamed the neighbor. And when herbs healed more than whiskey ever could, they called the woman who mixed them cursed. He looked at Isabella and shook his head. There was nothing cursed about her. She was flesh and blood, beaten and left to die under the open sky. The real curse was the ignorance of the people who did this to her. As he held her up, he felt the heat of her skin. The desert sun had baked her near to death. Her lips cracked as she tried to speak again. Jack leaned close, listening. They said my herbs were poison. They said I brought sickness. Her voice cracked on the last word. It was the sound of someone carrying the weight of lies too heavy for any soul. Jack clenched his jaw and looked out over the tree line. The shadows were growing longer. Night was coming. Coyotes would soon be on the move, and he had no doubt they would catch her scent. He couldn't leave her here. Not now. Not after hearing the truth spill from her mouth. He lifted her carefully and laid her across his horse. She was light as a feather, weak from days of pain and thirst. He swung up behind her, steadying her with one arm. The horse shifted under the weight, then started toward an old shack Jack knew a mile down the trail. It wasn't much, but it would be shelter for the night. As they rode, Jack's mind burned. He thought about the men in Tombstone. He thought about how quick they would be to come looking once they realized Isabella wasn't where they left her. He knew what was coming. Fear turns men into monsters and mobs into killers. If the town branded her a witch once, they would not stop until she was gone for good. The desert wind whipped against his face as he tightened his grip on the reins. The question burned in him now. Was he ready to fight a whole town for one broken woman? And if he did, how far would they go to silence both of them? If you are still here riding with me through this story, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of the trail. And while you are at it, pour yourself a cup of tea, lean back, and tell me this. What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Jack guided the horse to the old shack he kept near the ridge. It was nothing more than 4 walls and a leaky roof, but it would have to do. He carried Isabella inside and set her down on a bedroll. She drank greedily from his canteen, water running down her chin, then slumped back with her eyes half closed. for the first time since he found her. She looked like she might survive the night. Jack sat near the doorway, his Colt resting heavy across his lap. He'd been around long enough to know peace never lasted long in these parts. And he was right. The sound came first. Boots on gravel, voices, low and mean, drifting through the dark. His hand tightened on the gun. The door creaked open and 3 men stepped out of the night. Jack recognized them from Tombstone, saloon rats, not brave on their own, but bold enough when they traveled in packs. The tallest one grinned, his teeth catching the lantern light. "Cole, we know you got her. Hand her over. The law says she belongs to the beasts." Jack stood, his shadow stretching long behind him. "She is not going anywhere with you." His voice was steady, like stone. The men shifted, looking past him, searching the shack for Isabella. Their eyes were hungry, like wolves circling a wounded deer. The tall one spat in the dirt. "She is a witch. Cole, you are making a mistake." Jack thought of Isabella's bruises, the ropes cutting into her skin, the way her lips cracked when she whispered the word cursed. The anger rose hot in his chest, hotter than fear. In one smooth motion, the Colt came up. The crack of the shot split the night sky. The bullet tore clean through the brim of the tall man's hat, spinning it into the dust. For a long second, nobody moved. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Then Jack's voice cut through the silence. "The next one doesn't miss." The men froze. Their bravado drained faster than whiskey from a broken bottle. They cursed under their breath, backing into the shadows, leaving their pride scattered in the dirt. Jack kept his finger on the trigger until they were gone. He knew they would be back, and he knew this was only the beginning, because when a man defies the law of the town, the whole town comes looking. And by morning, Jack Malone would not be facing 3 men. He would be facing an angry mob. But what would happen when the entire village came to claim her life? The night gave way to a blazing dawn. Jack Malone had barely slept, sitting outside the shack with his rifle across his knees. He knew the 3 men would not be the last, and he was right. By sunrise, the sound of horses carried on the hot wind. Voices rose, angry and restless. Dust curled up on the horizon as a crowd appeared, not just men, women too. Even boys clutching sticks, their faces twisted by fear. The village had come as a mob. They stopped just short of the shack, shouting over one another. "Cole, hand her over. She is cursed. She is danger to us all." Jack's grip tightened on his revolver. He could take a few down, maybe enough to scatter the rest. But he also knew blood in the sand would not bring peace. It would only fuel the fire. Then the crowd parted. A tall figure stepped forward, not with a gun, but with a black coat that carried its own weight. Reverend Samuel Blackwood, the town's pastor, raised his hand. The mob fell quiet. His voice rang deep and steady. "You call her a witch. You call her cursed, but I call her what she is. A child of God. Look at her. Look at what you have done." The silence that followed was heavy. Scripture rolled from his tongue. "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." His gaze swept across the villagers. One by one, they faltered. A rifle lowered. A woman pulled her boy back. The anger drained from the crowd like water from a cracked G. And slowly, the mob dissolved into nothing but dust and shame. Inside the shack, Isabella stirred. Whispering Jack's name, he knew it was not the end. Mercy granted in daylight could still be stolen in the dark. But for now, the mob had broken. Jack lifted her onto his horse once more. Together, they rode away from Tombstone. Each mile was another step toward freedom. At his small ranch, Isabella began to heal. The color returned to her cheeks. Her strength grew day by day. She would sit on the porch at dusk, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun sink low. Jack sat beside her, quiet but steady, sharpening a blade or mending a rope, always keeping one eye on her. In that silence, something more powerful than fear grew between them. Not passion, but sacrifice. Not lust, but love. That is the truth of the West. The desert tests a man, but it also shows what he's made of. Jack could have walked away. He could have said she was not his problem. Instead, he chose to fight for her life. And in doing so, he discovered something greater than fear and hate. He discovered that mercy is the strongest form of justice. So let me ask you this. When you see someone cast aside by judgment, would you walk away or would you stop and fight for them? If this story touched you, give this video a like and share it with someone who still believes in courage. And now, before I end this ride, let me take a moment to speak to you from the heart. I am grateful to each of you who support this channel by watching and leaving kind comments. I do read them, even if I cannot always reply. I notice that many of you watch these videos late at night. I hope you will take better care of yourselves. These stories are meant for entertainment in your free time, if it is already late. I truly wish you would get some rest and guard your health. I must also say I'm sorry for not interacting more often. The truth is, I am getting older, and after long hours at the computer editing these videos, I'm often too tired. That is why I pay more attention to my health now, and I care about yours as well. Thank you for standing by me and riding along this trail of stories.